My name is Julian Vance. I'm 17 years old, though most days I feel like I've lived 3 times that. It was August 14th, 2024, in Phoenix, Arizona. The kind of heat that doesn't just sit on you. It presses into your lungs until every breath feels like you're inhaling powdered glass. I was working a summer shift at a local distribution warehouse, moving crates of bottled water. The irony wasn't lost on me. My shirt was a second skin of salt and grit. I remember looking at the digital clock on the break room wall, 2:14 p.m. That's the last timestamp of my normal life. The first sign wasn't pain. It was a sudden, jarring disconnect, like a radio station drifting into static. My vision didn't go black. It went white, a searing, bleached-out overexposure. I felt my knees hit the concrete, a dull thud that seemed to happen to someone else's body. Then came the nausea, a violent, rhythmic pulsing in my throat. I tried to call out to my supervisor, Mike, but my tongue felt like a piece of dry leather pinned to the roof of my mouth. I heard the sound of a plastic crate shattering near my head. Julian? Hey, Vance. Mike's voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. I felt his hands on my shoulders, shaking me, but I couldn't tension my muscles to respond. My heart wasn't beating. It was fluttering, a panicked bird trapped in a cage of ribs. It's called ventricular fibrillation. I knew the term from biology class, but experiencing it is different. It's the sensation of your internal engine stalling while you're still moving at 60 miles per hour. The heat in the warehouse suddenly vanished, replaced by a cold so absolute it felt like it was radiating from my own bones. I remember the smell of ozone and floor wax. I saw the fluorescent lights flickering above me, and then, with a final, sickening lurch of my chest, the flickering stopped. Everything stopped. I wasn't just tired. I was failing. The biological machinery that had carried me for 17 years simply gave up the ghost under the weight of the Arizona sun. The transition wasn't a tunnel or a transition at all. It was a shift in perspective. I was looking down at a boy who looked like me, but he was gray, a dusty, ashen color that didn't belong on a teenager. I was in the back of an ambulance now. I don't remember the transition from the warehouse floor to the gurney, but the realism was suffocating. I could see the paramedic, a woman with a frayed ponytail and a smudge of dirt on her cheek, slamming her weight into my chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm was mechanical. I saw the way my chest didn't bounce back quite right. He's in V-fib. Charge to 200, she shouted. Her partner, a younger guy whose hands were shaking slightly, fumbled with the defibrillator pads. I watched them peel back my sweat-soaked shirt. I felt a strange sense of empathy for them. They were working so hard on a suit I wasn't wearing anymore. When the paddles hit, my body on the gurney arched, a violent, inorganic spasm. The monitor emitted a flat, continuous whine that cut through the siren's wail. It's a sound you never forget. It's the sound of a life ending in a series of digital pulses. Clear. Again. The second shock was stronger. I saw the sparks, or maybe I just felt the energy of it. I was hovering near the ceiling of the rig, noticing things no one should notice. A discarded candy bar wrapper in the corner, the way the medic's wedding ring clicked against the metal oxygen tank. I wasn't scared. I was observant. I saw the clock on the dashboard, 2:38 p.m. I had been clinically dead for nearly 4 minutes. The air in the ambulance felt thick, not with heat, but with the desperation of 2 people trying to outrun a shadow. Then, the walls of the ambulance began to thin. The white plastic and stainless steel became translucent, like wet paper, and the frantic noise of the medical equipment began to dissolve into a silence so heavy I could feel it against my skin. The city of Phoenix below us didn't fade. It just became irrelevant as the floor of the ambulance finally gave way entirely. The silence wasn't empty. It was crowded. I found myself standing, not floating, but standing with weight, on a surface that felt like polished obsidian. It was dark, but I could see perfectly. I wasn't in a heaven of clouds and harps. I was in a place that felt like the blueprints of reality. And he was there. He wasn't glowing with a blinding, cinematic light that obscured his features. He looked like a man who had walked a long way to find me. He wore a simple, dark tunic, and his hands were rough, the hands of someone who knew manual labor, much like the guys back at the warehouse. "Julian," he said. His voice didn't echo. It sat directly in the center of my mind, bypassing my ears. It carried the weight of 1,000 years, but the intimacy of a whisper. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't say everything was okay. He looked past me, and suddenly, the dark floor beneath us became a window. I wasn't looking at the world in a general sense. I was looking at 4 distinct points of light on a map of the United States. For cities, I saw their skylines, the familiar silhouettes of buildings, and the pulsing grids of their streetlights. New York, Chicago, Houston, and Los Angeles. They looked like organs in a body, but they were graying at the edges, the same color I had been on that gurney. "They are not ready," he said, and for the first time, I felt a tremor of genuine terror. It wasn't a threat. It was an observation of a tragedy already in motion. The year 2026 is a threshold, Julian. Most believe they are waiting for a climax, a single moment of fire. But the fire is already burning in the basements. It's in the cupboards. It's in the way they look at their neighbors. He turned to me, and his eyes weren't blue or brown. They were the color of deep water. "I am going to show you why these 4 pillars are crumbling. I am going to show you what happens when the salt loses its flavor and the cities forget how to breathe." He reached out and touched my shoulder. His hand was warm, the only warm thing in that vast, dark expanse. "Don't look away. You have to tell them why the gates are being left unlocked." The obsidian floor beneath us dissolved, and suddenly I wasn't in the afterlife anymore. I was standing in the foyer of a massive, modern home in the hills of Los Angeles. It was a Sunday morning, and the air smelled of expensive espresso and high-end cleaning products. I saw a man, maybe 40, frantically scrolling through a banking app on his phone. His hands were shaking so hard, he dropped his car keys on the marble floor. The sound was deafening in the silence of the house. He didn't pick them up. He just stared at the screen, his face draining of color. "Look at his heart, Julian," Jesus said, standing right beside me. He didn't point, he just looked. In 2026, the digital walls fall, not all at once, but in a way that reveals the rot. I watched as the man's wife walked in, dressed for a brunch that would never happen. She saw him and stopped. There was no comfort offered, no "are you okay?" There was only a sharp, brittle look of calculation. She saw his failure before she saw his fear. Their relationship didn't break because of a fight. It broke because the utility was gone. The love they had built was just a series of transactions, and the bank was closing. "This is the first city," Jesus said quietly. "Los Angeles, a city built on the image of the self. In 2026, the image shatters because the mirrors are being taken away. When the wealth becomes a ghost, they will realize they don't even know the names of the people sleeping in the next room." I saw the man finally look up at his wife, and the look in his eyes was one of a drowning man realizing the person on the dock is holding a weight, not a rope. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "It's gone, Elena. All of it." She didn't move toward him. She stepped back, her hand moving instinctively to her diamond necklace. The personal fracture was instantaneous and absolute. This wasn't a global disaster yet. It was a domestic one, happening in 1,000 hallways across the hills. The warning wasn't about a bomb. It was about the sudden, cold realization that they had sacrificed everything for a foundation of sand. The scene shifted with a sickening lurch, the smell of salt air replaced by the metallic, damp scent of a Chicago winter. We were standing in a cramped, dimly lit office inside a massive municipal building. Files were stacked so high they looked like leaning towers. A woman sat at a metal desk, her head in her hands. She was a mid-level administrator, someone who had spent 20 years playing the game. I could see her computer screen, a spreadsheet glowing with red numbers that shouldn't have been there. She was deleting lines of data, her breath coming in ragged hitches. "Chicago," Jesus murmured. His voice held a profound sadness, like a father watching a child commit a crime they can't take back. "A city of systems. In 2026, the systems demand a sacrifice. To keep the lights on, they will begin to harvest the very people they were meant to protect. This woman is not a monster, Julian. She is just afraid of being the one left outside." I watched her finger hover over the enter key. She was authorizing the cutting of heating subsidies for 3 elderly housing blocks to cover a pension shortfall she had helped hide. She knew people would die in the February freeze. She knew their names. She looked at a framed photo of her own grandchildren on her desk, then she hit the key. The red numbers vanished, replaced by a clean, line green. The moral compromise was finished. By 2026, Jesus explained, the institutional weight will become so heavy that the only way to stay upright is to push others down. The church in this city has become a department of the state, and the state has become a ledger of debt. They are not ready because they believe they can balance the books with human lives. They think I am not watching the deletions. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago wind. It was the realization that the warning wasn't a prediction of a natural disaster, but a revelation of a spiritual bankruptcy that had already reached its limit. The city was functioning, but its soul had been signed away in a basement office. The transition to New York was loud. It wasn't the sound of traffic, but the sound of thousands of feet shuffling on pavement. We were in a grocery store in Queens, but the shelves were mostly empty, save for a few dented cans of vegetables. The tension in the air was physical, like the static before a lightning strike. A young mother was standing at the checkout, her face a mask of controlled panic. She was trying to pay for 2 gallons of milk and a loaf of bread with 3 different credit cards. Declined, declined, declined. The cashier, a teenager who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The network is down for these providers." Again, the people behind her in line didn't offer to help. They didn't even look annoyed. They looked hungry. There was a hollow, predatory stillness in their eyes. This was New York in 2026, a city where the logistics of survival had become a daily gamble. The social tension wasn't a protest. It was the quiet, terrifying withdrawal of human empathy. "New York," Jesus said, his hand tightening slightly on my shoulder. "The city of commerce. When the exchange fails, the heart hardens." In 2026, the division between the haves and the have-nots will no longer be a political debate. It will be a physical wall. Look at the man behind her. I saw an older man in a tailored coat, clutching a bag of high-end groceries he'd managed to secure elsewhere. He was staring at the mother's back, not with pity, but with a guarded, defensive anger. He moved his bag to the other side of his body, away from her reach. "The church here has closed its doors to the street to protect its stained glass," Jesus continued. "They think the 2026 shift is about a change in government. It is not. It is about the removal of the mask. The city is not ready because it has no storehouse of kindness left. When the bread fails, the brotherhood fails." I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my own chest, a reminder of the hospital bed I was still lying in. The warning was becoming personal. I realized I was just like that man in the coat. I had spent my whole life looking out for Julian Vance, and now I was seeing where that road ended. The transition to Houston didn't come with the sound of rain, but with a heat so oppressive it felt like being buried in warm, wet sand. We were standing in a megachurch parking lot, the kind that looks like a small city of asphalt. It was midday, and the sun was reflecting off thousands of windshields. But the church doors were chained, not by the government, and not by some sweeping decree. They were chained from the inside by a small group of board members I could see through the tinted glass of the administrative wing. They were arguing over a legal document, their faces flushed and angry. "Houston," Jesus said, his voice sounding heavier now, like a tolling bell. "The city of energy and oil. In 2026, the fuel for their faith runs dry. They have built monuments to my name, Julian, but they have forgotten my nature." I watched as a man in a tattered work shirt approached the glass doors, banging his fist weakly against the frame. He looked exhausted, his boots caked in red clay. He wasn't looking for a sermon. He was looking for water. The men inside didn't even look up from their paperwork. They were too busy discussing the liability of opening the sanctuary to the displaced. "The church in 2026 will face a choice," Jesus explained, his eyes fixed on the man at the door. "To be a fortress or a fountain." In Houston, the fortresses are being built higher every day. They are not ready because they believe their security lies in their walls and their tax-exempt status. When the waters of life stop flowing, they will find that gold is a very poor life jacket. I felt a personal sting, a memory of my own family driving past the homeless camps on the way to our comfortable pew. The moral compromise wasn't a single event, it was 1,000 small turnaways. I saw the man at the door slide down the glass, sitting in the heat, ignored by the very people who claimed to represent the man standing next to me. The city was drowning in its own indifference. The 4 cities began to swirl together into a single, terrifying mosaic of American life. We were back on the obsidian floor, but now the window beneath us showed the entire nation, glowing with a nervous, flickering energy. It was 2026. I could feel the date like a physical weight in the air. It wasn't the end of the world in a cinematic sense. There were no mushroom clouds or monsters, but the atmosphere was saturated with a profound, vibrating anxiety. It was the feeling of a society that had run out of excuses. "Julian," Jesus said, turning me to face him. His expression was no longer just sad, it was urgent. People ask, why 2026, as if it is a random number. It is the year of the harvest of consequences. For decades, these four pillars, image, system, commerce, and energy, have been hollowed out by greed and fear. In 2026, the weight of the lies becomes greater than the strength of the pillars. It happens because the heart of the people has become a vacuum, and something must fill it. He leaned in closer, and I could see the reflection of the flickering cities in his pupils. "What changes is the visibility of the truth," he continued. "In 2026, the middle ground disappears. You will no longer be able to be sort of kind or mostly honest. The pressure will force every person to show exactly who they serve. The outcome is determined by one thing: where you have placed your treasure. If your treasure is in the Bank of New York, the systems of Chicago, the mirrors of LA, or the walls of Houston, you will go down with them. Only those who have become the bread for others will survive the hunger." He wasn't talking about surviving in a bunker. He was talking about the survival of the human soul. The warning was that the world we knew was being stripped to the studs, and most people were still trying to hang wallpaper on a wall that was already gone. Suddenly, the vision of the cities vanished, and I was standing in a place I knew too well, my own living room back in Phoenix. It was evening, and the light from the television was casting blue shadows on the walls. I saw my father sitting in his recliner, his face illuminated by the glow of a tablet. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. My mother was in the kitchen, and I could hear the sound of her crying, a low, rhythmic sob she was trying to stifle behind the noise of the running faucet. "This is your home in 2026, Julian," Jesus said softly. "The fracture is here too." I walked over to my father and looked at what he was reading. It was a notice of foreclosure, but it wasn't just about the house. It was a series of emails from his brother, my Uncle Dave, filled with such vitriol and political hatred that it didn't even look like family communication anymore. They were arguing over a debt and a disagreement that had turned into a blood feud. My father's hand was hovering over the block button, his face a mask of cold, hard resentment. "This is the self-confrontation," Jesus said. "You see the cities, but the cities are just collections of homes like this. In 2026, the peace you thought you had will be revealed as mere convenience. When the money gets tight and the fear gets loud, will you still love the brother who hates you? Will you still be my witness when you have nothing left to give?" I felt a surge of shame. I realized that in my own heart, I had already blocked people who were difficult to love. I was part of the not ready. The warning wasn't for them out there in the big cities. It was for me, right here in this living room. I looked at my mother's shaking shoulders in the kitchen and felt the crushing weight of my own inadequacy. I wasn't the hero of this story. I was just another person who needed to be saved from his own coldness. The living room in Phoenix began to warp, the walls stretching and thinning until they were just ribbons of gray smoke. I was back on that obsidian floor, standing face to face with the man who had just dissected the soul of my country. The silence was heavier now, charged with the electricity of an impending decision. I looked at my hands. They were translucent, flickering like a dying bulb. I knew the paramedics in that ambulance were hitting me with the third or fourth shock. I could feel the rhythmic, violent thudding in some distant part of my consciousness. "Julian," he said, and this time he didn't look at the cities. He looked only at me. "You see the cities. You see the house. You see the date. 2026 is not a punishment sent from above. It is the harvest of what has been planted in the dark. The reason they are not ready is because they have spent their lives preparing for a world that is passing away. They have stored up gold that is turning to lead and built reputations that are blowing away like ash." He stepped closer, his presence so dense it felt like gravity. "The choice is not whether 2026 happens. The choice is who you will be when the shaking begins. Will you be the one clutching your groceries in Queens, or the one breaking your last loaf for the person behind you?" I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. I wasn't a saint. I was a 17-year-old kid who liked video games and complained about chores. I realized that the not ready status wasn't a grade on a test. It was a state of being. The world was about to enter a tunnel of extreme pressure, and I was being asked if I would carry the light or just try to save my own skin. "I'm not strong enough," I whispered, my voice sounding like dry leaves. He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a warrior's smile. "No one is. That is why the pride must break first. The cities must fail so the people can find the Father. Are you willing to go back and be the one who warns them that the walls are already down?" The obsidian floor didn't just vanish, it shattered. I felt myself falling, not through space, but through layers of memory and sensation. The heat of Phoenix rushed back at me like a physical blow. The smell of copper, ozone, and burnt hair filled my nose. Crack. My body arched so hard I felt my ribs groan. The ceiling of the ambulance snapped into focus, a harsh, sterile white that made my eyes scream. "We have a rhythm. He's back." "Pulse is weak but steady," the female paramedic shouted. Her face was drenched in sweat, strands of hair sticking to her forehead. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it had been scraped with a wire brush. I could only make a raspy, clicking sound. I felt the cold plastic of an oxygen mask being pressed over my face. The world was loud, chaotic, and unimaginably heavy. I wanted to go back to the obsidian, to the clarity of the warning, but the weight of my own biology was pulling me down into a dark, drugged sleep. I remember being wheeled through the automatic doors of the emergency room. The fluorescent lights were a blur of strobe-like flashes. I saw a nurse running alongside my gurney, her eyes fixed on a clipboard. But as we passed a waiting area, I saw something that stopped my heart again. A television was mounted in the corner, muted, showing a news crawl about a massive data breach and a sudden market correction. A man was standing under the TV, his face identical to the man I saw in Los Angeles. That same look of hollow, calculating panic. He was staring at his phone, his thumb frantically swiping. It wasn't 2026 yet, but the seeds were right there in the ER waiting room. The paramedic squeezed my hand, her grip tight and grounding. "Stay with us, Julian. You're okay." But I knew I wasn't. None of us were. I closed my eyes, and the image of those 4 graying cities burned behind my eyelids like a brand. Recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl. They told me I had a congenital heart defect exacerbated by extreme heat exhaustion, a perfect storm, the doctor called it. I spent weeks in a haze of beta blockers and follow-up appointments. My parents were there, of course, relieved and hovering, but the fracture I had seen in the vision was already starting to show. My father was quieter, more irritable, constantly checking his phone with a grimace. The tension in our house wasn't a loud explosion. It was a slow-growing mold in the corners. The proof didn't come in a dream or a booming voice. It came 2 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon. I was checking the mail, my chest still tender from the surgery. Among the bills and junk mail was a thick, official-looking envelope addressed to my father from a law firm in Houston. I knew that logo. I had seen it on the desk in the megachurch office during the vision. I watched my father open it at the kitchen table. His face didn't just turn pale, it turned that specific, ashen gray I had seen on my own dead body. It was a legal notice involving a massive restructuring of his pension fund. The same fund tied to the Chicago systems I had watched being manipulated. The letter stated that due to unforeseen digital inconsistencies, his projected retirement was being frozen indefinitely. It was the first domino. He looked up at me, and for a second, the mask of the strong father slipped. I saw the man from the Los Angeles hallway. I saw the fear of 2026 reflecting in his eyes 2 years early. He didn't say a word. He just folded the paper with shaking hands and walked into the backyard, leaving the back door hanging open. I stood there in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. I looked at the calendar on the wall, the months ticking steadily toward that threshold. The warning wasn't a story I was telling. It was the air I was breathing. I reached out and touched the countertop, the cold granite feeling solid and temporary all at once.